Hello everyone. On behalf of Indian National Trust for Art and Culture Heritage INTACH and the INTACH Conservation Institutes, I extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Mr. Nick Boyce, and everyone who has joined us for today's talk in the Conservation Insights 2020 lecture series. I'm Dr. Padma Rohila, Director ICI Delhi. Now to introduce our speaker, Nick has been with us. He's already delivered a very interesting talk earlier. Nick Boyce is an ACR accredited conservator restorer with over 20 years experience in the conservation of historically important buildings, monuments, and sculptures. He has worked extensively on projects such as Temple of Decision, which we'll be discussing today, Kingdom of Five, Rosalind Chapel, Edinburgh. We had the pleasure of listening to that case study earlier. The Glasgow School of Art building and the Kelvin Way Bridge Sanctuary. Nick was also featured on the 2013 BBC documentary about the conservation works to Rosalind Chapel. He's a member of SPAB Scotland Committee. The title for today's talk is Arresting the Agents of Decay Affecting the Temple of Decision. The Temple of Decision is a masonry structure that is located on a remote hilltop in central Scotland. The Temple of Decision is a building with direct Indian connection with regards to original construction and the choice of location. The building has suffered a dramatic deterioration during the 20th century, resulting in significant deconstruction. During 2016, the remedial action plan was designed for the building, which was undertaken and completed in 2017. This paper will discuss the conservation philosophy adopted and the practical challenges of arresting the agents of decay affecting the Temple of Decision. Before I invite Nick Boyce, may I please request all of you to mute your microphones. Please do type in the questions in the chat box. We'll be taking those up at the end of the talk. And now over to you, Nick. Thanks a lot for accepting the invitation and thank you for the presentation beforehand. Thank you. Over to you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Padma. Thank you for that glowing introduction and welcome. It's my pleasure to be talking to you today. So without further ado, let's play. Again, many thanks for inviting me to talk about this particular building and our interactions in the 20th century with this building. And I'd like to sort of personify these structures. And so this is my favorite 19th century crushed masonry structure. And so please look at the title very carefully. This talk has two titles. The first dynamic title that sounds like it's a movie is Arresting the Agents of Decay, Affecting the Temple of Decision. I couldn't squeeze any more emotive words into that particularly, but perhaps the drier title of this is to identify that the Temple of Decision, which is located on the Falkland estate and was designed by Alexander Roos, the project to rescue it from the brink of complete collapse. And we're going to discuss the value of the curated ruin. Okay, so there is a lot to deal with here. So this is the building that we are talking about. This is the most exquisite, small, neoclassical Greek revival jewel located within the crown of the Scottish landscape. And what I would like to talk about in this slide is that we're not just talking about the beautiful columned with a rigidly beautiful pedimentally building. We're also talking about
Nick, can you hear me?
burnt roof timbers just remaining from the structure here. So it's not written anywhere that there was a fire, but I think perhaps we can consider that there was a fire, and perhaps that fire is an accident, or perhaps it is in its part of more malicious damage. But what we can see remaining is this beautiful structure. So simple, but beautiful. And the exquisitely constructed ashlar masonry with very fine construction joints and these elegant pilasters forming each corner. This is the 1988 image. So as you can see, what we have here are 4 columns and a portico, a pediment, defying the laws of physics, in my view, certainly defying the laws of gravity. And you can see the deconstructed masonry behind the columns there. And this is the image of 1998, where the trees were removed, revealing the very, revealing the very dilapidated masonry structure with all of this sort of deconstructed masonry lying around about it in amongst the fallen trees and the industrialized tree removal works at that point. So this is pretty much, this view of 1998 is very similar to the view that we had in 2016 when I first walked up the hill. But in terms of the building, the location, and how the Temple of Decision came to be, I would just like to play you this soundbite from the current owner, or owner in part, of this House of Falkland estate by the name of Ninian Crichton Stewart. And you'll hear Ninian's voice next.
A few years ago, I hosted a visit of an Indian gentleman called Deven from the foothills of the Himalayas. We walked up Maspiden and he took off his shoes as he sensed we were entering a sacred landscape, geologically and spiritually, journeying inwards as we followed the flow of the water to behind the Yad waterfall before stepping out of the ravine to see the landscape open out into a long view across the How. As we reached the site of the temple, I explained that the funds for this landscape folly had come from a landowner who had profited from the East India Company. I was being something of an apologist for the British colonial exploits of the 19th century. However, Deven rebuked me kindly by saying that I clearly did not understand the significance of the temple. And he went on to say that where he came from, ordinary people journeyed to temple sites in the hills because the physical perspective influenced our spiritual and psychological perspective. So whenever people need to make or reflect upon life-changing events, he spoke about them, his family, for instance, going up to these temples. And he encouraged me not to undervalue the site or the motives behind it. What he didn't realise, until I went on to tell him, was that Margaret Tyndall Bruce, the woman who inherited the estate from her uncle and commissioned the temple, had an Indian mother.
So it's my intention to use that soundbite really to make the clear connection with Margaret Tyndall Bruce's Indian heritage and then 21st century reference to how important this position of the temple was. And this view really gives an indication, gives a bit of a preview to the most amazing view that this building, when it was designed, was intended to look out onto. And this is a drone view of the building as it was in 2016. And from the history, brief history that I've been able to provide, to share with you, we can see those sort of distinct phases of decay. And we can see that last 1988 collapse of the portico, and the columns are still visible, aligned in the direction that they fell. And this is a survey photograph from 2016. And this is a view of the inside of the building. So this is a view of the fireplace. Right, so we spoke about there being a fire, perhaps, as recorded in 1965. But this image is intended to show you the beauty of the sort of more everyday construction, masonry construction. So this masonry construction was never intended to be seen, but this is coursed rubble masonry. This is the core of the wall that we're seeing, that on the outside is covered by the most beautiful ashlar, fine ashlar masonry, which is very smart and very well done. And on the inside would have been covered with laths, plaster, and perhaps some form of decoration on the walls, a rug or some level of comfort. So we're able to appreciate this masonry structure for what it is, knowing full well that it was intended not to be seen. And I would like to draw your attention to the top of this structure and the right-hand side. And the sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stones, perhaps, that you can see all in a line, became known as the stone hinge. Why the stone hinge? Well, because just like a hinge, it had turned through nearly 90 degrees and was one of the alarming aspects of this structure in terms of consolidating its status going forwards. And here, my description of that fine ashlar masonry. So you can see that it's not particularly coarse. It is of a highly complex construction, but it is beautiful for all of that. And in fact, when it was new, as you saw from the 1965 image, even then, at nearly over 100 years old, the masonry is almost one. The construction joints are so incredibly fine that they almost are invisible. And here is a view of myself looking at this building in 2016, and a grey day and a very interesting day for me, as you can imagine, trying to then unpick the masonry collateral damage and understand what we had and how we were going to make a positive impact to it. Right. So I should quickly explain that my involvement then was that I was approached by the architect who was acting for the House of Falkland estate, and I was asked to design and implement, in collaboration with a very good stone masonry company, the consolidation approach, a contractual arrangement in terms of putting a handbrake on the further decay of this amazing structure. And this animation will not work. I've tried it before, but what it does serve in this image to illustrate that we now in the 21st century have all manner of tools available to us in order to understand the structure, visualize the structure, spin the structure on our screens, and interact in it in ways that we would not have been able to in the past. So if we just think a little bit about the photography of 1965 by the Royal Commission, now part of Historic Environment Scotland, have every single digital tool available to them to understand, not just in terms of 3D digital imagery, but also thermal information, damp information. So we, in the 21st century, speak from a very privileged position in terms of our own technology, allowing us to understand these decayed building structures. So I said just a little while ago then about, I was approached by the architect to try and design a scheme for the consolidation of the Temple of Decision. Jokingly, I understand that the Temple of Decision was called the Temple of Indecision by the House of Falkland estate because it took them a while to understand what it was that they wanted to achieve. And I was happy to contribute to, our approach and what came to be our practical approach on the building. So I had 2 attempts at designing this project. And this is obviously a photograph of a helicopter to illustrate the sort of my initial project vision, and that was heavily impacted by the difficulty of the landscape. So we know that this temple is in a difficult place to reach. And so my original concept was that we would engage the services of the British Army and invite them to have some sort of exercise and provide us with the building materials and provide us with the scaffolding required to have safe access to this structure. And you can imagine that this particular project vision cost a great deal more money than this project vision, this being project vision number 2. And this is how it came to be. So the first helicopter illustrated vision could have been £300,000. And the House of Falkland Trust did not want or wish or perhaps couldn't spend £300,000 on this particular project. So the number came back down to a very manageable, for them, £50,000 or £60,000. I forget the details just now. But what it meant was that I went through the process of re-engineering our approach to this building, the practicalities of conducting conservation works to this building, which meant that I went suddenly from helicopters and the British Army to a very local and volunteer-based effort. And I think that 1,300 hours. This second vision is much more of what the planet wants us to do. Of course, this planet wants us to think locally, think inventively about how to surmount particular problems, particular practical problems. So this project began like this, and the caravan isn't for camping or sleeping or enjoying. This caravan is simply stonemasonry comfort facilities. It gives the stonemasons a place to sit down, wash their hands and eat their lunch. Excuse me. And that's my motorbike, so I would very much enjoy going up this gravel road, winding up to the top to visit site, and then walking the last 500 or 750 meters to this particular site. And this is a view of the site in progress. So you can see the Temple of Decision is being scaffolded at that point, and you can see the site facilities at this point. This is a tent. You can see a bath there for the mixing of lime. You can see water there for obviously hydrating lime mortar. What you can't see are the bags of sand that have been delivered by that four-wheel drive quad, that small Honda quad bike and trailer. So everything that you see here was either driven up with that quad or walked up on the backs of strong men and women. And here we do a bit of a reveal, because you can see just what an amazing position this building has over the Scottish landscape. And we're looking west at this point, and we can probably see for 10 or 15 miles on a clear day. And this isn't a clear day. But what you can see, right, so in terms of rethinking the practicalities of conducting this conservation project, we cannot take shortcuts in terms of health and safety. We must make sure that everybody who comes to work, not just the stonemasons who come to do the work, but also the volunteers who come to assist the stonemasonry, and volunteers who came for training opportunities, that everybody who comes to work goes home safely, rewarded by a full day's work without coming to any harm whatsoever. So that meant that this scaffolding had to be properly and constructed to a British standard as ever. Even though we are a long way away from anywhere particularly, we still expect a visit from the Health and Safety Executive to make sure that we are doing what we are obliged to do in terms of providing a safe environment for this work. However, one other thing I would like to talk about is that it's important to me that this scaffolding structure doesn't impact the building in a negative way in itself. So there are to be no drilled ties into the masonry in order to ask the masonry to keep the scaffolding up. This scaffolding was built to be self-supporting, self-secured, and you can see the sort of supports coming away. This scaffold went on to feature debris netting and some material to sort of shade the masonry structure as part of the conservation works, as part of the lime works, which I'll talk about in the next few minutes. And this is another photograph of the challenge that myself, standing on the left, and my collaborating partner, Richard Fraser, who is the leader of the masonry company, and we are obviously discussing the project from this elevated platform. This is the first time that we have tactile access to the upper parts of the structure. But this photograph illustrates eloquently the challenge that we have, just in terms of how congested the ground around the chapel is by the fact that the stone masonry is collapsed in that direction. And you can see the growth of vegetation, which we read about in 1965. And it gave me an opportunity to use my eyes and my hands and my camera to sort of record individual items of defect, damage, and decay. So I'm just going to stroll straight back to the title of this. This is where I can identify which agents of decay, which individual items of defect, damage, and decay we're attempting to arrest, and making the final design decisions as to the approach that we're going to make in terms of consolidating this structure. So I'd like to get a little bit technical now, and I'd like to begin to talk about those individual agents of decay, those individual items of defect, damage, and decay as we found them. So this is the hinge, stone hinge. Obviously a bit of a joke. We have the Stonehenge in the south of England. Well, this is Stonehenge in Scotland. And you can see that these 4 stones are actually have rotated through many degrees, and there is collateral damage as a result of that. And there is a very real risk of these stones falling into the temple interior, causing further collateral damage, and who knows, perhaps causing further collapse. When this stone hinge comes off, then another stone hinge or another masonry structure is compromised. And of course, not only would it cause damage to these individual stone blocks, but you don't know what it's falling on. So it might be falling on another bit of decoration, or it might be falling on a remaining piece of lath that we can use as evidence for any future reconstruction. So in terms of a traffic light, in terms of red, amber, and green, this is certainly a red, urgent, action required item within the masonry structure. But aside from that eye-catching stone hinge, what we also have are vegetation growing. So we've got cow parsley growing in the construction joints. The lime mortar beds there are turning literally into soil and creating a nutritious place for this cow parsley and other woody growth to start moving its way through the structure. And here you can see illustrated some that beginnings of this woody growth. So woody growth is much worse than buddleia or cow parsley, because the woody nature of the roots will begin to jack apart the masonry structure and cause further decay, further deconstruction. And my finger here is pointing at a vertical crack. And this obviously is as a result of point loading of this particular building stone. So this stone is reacting to the fact that the bedding mortar has been removed from the construction joint by 170 years worth of wind and weather and frost. And now we have stones sitting stone to stone, which is an unwelcome situation. And what we have here is point loading. So we've had a loss of stone in the bed underneath, and we still have this stone weighted. And obviously we have a crack as a result of these moving items. And another illustration of missing stones. So as a result, I don't think of malicious damage, but certainly as a result of movement within the building structure, maybe the action of, in this case, birds, we have, as a result, missing stones. And here we look down from pretty much over the wall heads, and you can see just what a fertile green place this Temple of Decision was never designed to be, but certainly is now. And certainly we have cow parsley, we have buddleia, and we have all sorts of other items there. And you can see that the way that the lime mortar is now turning brown and green, turning back to soil as perfect garden environment. And it's for me to make this obvious point, and that is that the Alexander Roos, who designed this building, never intended for the beautifully proportioned string course, for example, around the outside of the building, to be a garden bed. So this biological material is a very strict departure from the original design intent. And here you can see just another. This talks eloquently about the action of the wind. So you can see how elevated this position is. There is probably nothing to stop the westerly winds coming and hitting this building incredibly hard. And what you're seeing here are the effects of those winds whistling through the structure, and has actually caused this stone to reduce down back to a dust, back to a sand. So just showing the power of natural forces on this masonry structure. And this slide speaks very loudly about how all of the construction joints on the outside of this building are devoid of mortar, or not entirely devoid, because you can see that there are remnants of mortar, bedding mortar left within the construction joints, but you can also see the effects of the wind scooping that material out. And of course, this makes this building particularly prey to rainwater ingress, makes it prey to self-seeded growth of vegetation, as we've seen before. And so this is obviously another item of priority for us. And the wonderful thing about this building is that there was plenty of evidence. So if you reached into the construction joints, we could undertake analysis, detailed scientific analysis of the existing lime mortar. And from the analysis, work out the nature and the percentage of aggregate within the lime mortar mix. So we were looking at sand, and we were looking at inclusions. We saw burnt items. We saw unmixed bubbles of lime putty within the lime mortar. So this showed that, it wasn't a particularly sophisticated process that brought this lime to this place. But then we know all about that because we were in a similar position hereafter, mixing mortar and applying it in this location. So to make this point, how fantastic, once we built the scaffold, to be standing in the footprints of the very same people who had built this building, and going through some very similar experiences in terms of pointing these very fine construction joints. And here another view of a string course, otherwise known as a garden at this point, but the misalignment. So this construction joints, we're looking down at a joint between the string course, two items of string course, and you can see the misalignment, right? So there's no doubt that this would have been utterly and entirely straight and fine when originally built. But of course, over the next 170 years, the decay has resulted in settlement and obviously massive deconstruction at one end of the building. And I include this image. On the left-hand side, you can see the scaffold batten. You can see that we did use the building to butt the scaffolding against, but in no place do we drill into the masonry in order to secure the building. And you can see that not only was the building dynamic in terms of its decay, but the scaffolding also needed daily adjustment in order to make sure that it was fit for purpose, that it was providing the staff with a safe working platform. And so that means that that timber buffer would have been placed again in the middle of it, and the scaffold tightened against it in order to ensure that there was no movement. But this photograph is here for another reason, and that is to say that the utter beauty of this building still shines through despite its current condition. Because what we can see is this beautiful carved string course, carved bead, I should say, that acts as a drip from a string course. And the shadow that it casts is entirely what Alexander Roos intended for this building. So there are aspects of this building that still express its beauty. And a picture showing how dynamic the building's decay is. So here we have a view of the wall head, and we can see small pieces of stone, and we can see a large piece of stone that themselves are dynamic and still moving in the high wind speeds, and the growth of woody material, as I've described, will concede the continual unraveling of the wall heads. So pause for a moment and reflect on how the building has a whole variety of requests and demands in terms of what the nature of the conservation work should be. So I've sort of cantered through some of the items of defect, damage and decay. And now we're going to sort of look in detail, more technical talk about what our response to those individual items were. Scaffolding was the first thing, and I've spoken about that already, but this is a good view of the conditions that we were working in. So the works occurred during August and September, and in this time in Scotland, the mist is apparent, and the spiders' webs are being built in the woods, and it's a damp and good time to be conducting the lime mortar pointing. But so at this point here, we can see the nature of that scaffolding: competent and safe. And even though there's nobody there to read this site signage, the site signage is there. Again, expecting a visit by the health and safety executive to ensure that we're doing the right thing. And here we can see that the scaffold, which is giving us tactile access to this high level, is providing us with an ability to repoint. And you can see that the weather is moist. You can see that the mist is still, the cloud is low, and the air is damp. And these are perfect pointing conditions. And of course, lime mortar requires careful tending in order to ensure that it carbonates thoroughly before it dries out. So we take mitigating action to stop it from drying out. So this takes the form of very good quality Hessian sheeting. You can see that here, weighted down by bags of sand. And let's not take for granted how heavy these bags of sand are, right? So they might only be 25 kilos, but they've had to be carried or trailered up by a four-wheeled quad for up this hill. So these, this is an illustration of the efforts that have been gone through. And here you can see, this is one of the access paths, and you can see the work in progress. You can see that the top high-level masonry there is wrapped in order to give the mortar its best chance of carbonating thoroughly. And it's inevitable that there was deconstruction. In order to ensure that the construction is secure, then we need to carefully deconstruct, and that is easier said than done. So we just need to make sure that we identify each individual block, and we mark each individual block against a working drawing, so that if in the event somebody else had to come over quickly and take over the job because the stonemason fell ill, then the job could continue, and the authenticity of this construction would be continued as well. It's worth saying that I took a very clear decision early on that we could only get safe access to the external fine ashlar masonry because of the deconstructed masonry inside the chapel, and because of the threat of the hinge, for example, and other masonry falling into the inside, and the vegetation made it virtually impossible for us to even survey the inside and safely erect a scaffold structure to provide access. So what we did was we built a scaffold around the outside, and then without leaning over dramatically, we were able to conduct these remedial masonry works within one arm's length. So this project is already talking about being a first part of a phased consolidation process. And here is a little bit of movie talking about the practicalities of reversing the rotation of the stone hinge.
Like yourself? Yeah. This is going to turn. Okay, your side, my side. On it pivots at the back. Okay, so you need to lift up and rest it there. Okay, voila. Okay, got it.
So it's an obvious point, but there's the building stones of the Temple of Decision were all small enough to be manually handled. So there was no requirement for a crane on site. There was no requirement for a helicopter on site. So this is illustrated by this little bit of movie of Richard Fraser, very competent, experienced stonemason, and one of his staff, just in a very calm and focused way of lifting, debedding one of the stones, and then bringing one of the rotated stones back onto its bed without causing unnecessary collateral damage. You can imagine that there are ways to do that well, and there are ways to do that that will result in collateral damage of the arises if you were to scrape that stone back, for example. There's also danger that you could affect to yourself. I mean, you can imagine that one needs to learn how to handle stones, because the stone that was lifted off might itself weigh 12 kilos, I estimate. And so this is a view of the work in progress. The scaffolding is away because the scaffolding now is no longer required for that high level access. And you can see the hinge from the back at the top of that structure and left. You can see how everything is built back in, rotated back into place, built back in, and fully secured. And now the lime mortar is sort of highlighting the construction joints within the structure. And I spoke earlier about how it was perhaps intended that this masonry structure looks seamless. Well, I've recently visited the Temple of Decision, and the lime mortar has gone back to a sort of a much more much better color that makes itself much less visibly distracting. And what you can see here is that that structure is 2/3 pointed at this point. There still is pointing to be done at ground level with the scaffolding out of the way. And this sequence of images really just talks about how the Temple of Decision served as a vehicle to provide training to others. So many of the volunteers, many of the guys who carried scaffolding, and many of the people who drove the Honda quad bike with the trailer on probably hundreds of trips with sand and material and water. This was an opportunity to engage them in the practical work on the scaffolding. And it was a beautiful place to work, as you can see. And here you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mature volunteers fully engaged in care and attention of carefully pointing these very fine construction joints. And so that's one thing, the pointing of the construction joints. The next thing is consolidating the wall heads. The walls were effectively devoid of their protection. So the roof protects the wall head. So once the roof is away, then of course the wall is having to deal with the ingress of water, rainfall, for example, the effects of biological material. And so what we're trying to do here is to try and reinforce the wall heads. And we had two, or at least I had two ideas at this point. One was this rough racking idea, lime with stone, effectively building up a profile that is designed to manage the rainwater and allow the rainwater to fall benignly off the wall head. And this in Scotland is known as cherry cocking as well, where the large pieces of stone are not an authentic part of the construction of the wall head, but they are a construction intended to give the wall head as much protection as possible. So there was this rough racking concept, and then there was a soft capping concept, which was puddle clay over the top of the wall head, and then turf turned upside down. So it was grass down, soil up, and then another layer of turf, the correct way up, soil down, grass up, over the top. And this is an effective water weather protection method. And just to give an insight into the decision-making and the problem-solving process, we know how remote this place is, and we know how difficult it might be to conduct maintenance. So whatever conservation treatments, whatever remedial masonry works, they need to be relatively future-proof. And my experience of the soft capping was that it would perhaps become undone a little bit in the windy conditions that we find on top of this hillside. And so this, and also because of the sort of nature very close around and inside the Temple of Decision, there may well be self-seeded trees that would implant themselves into the soft capping and cause woody growth from that, and may even cause some leverage in the wind as a result of growth. So a little insight into some problem solving. And this is a view of that cherry cocking, that rough racking concept. So what you can see here are the intended ashlar masonry, and then what you can see are work in progress. You can see the still malleable lime mortar with the stone pinnings inserted right into it, through it, and emerging out onto the surface at this point. And here you can see the effects of the pointing on the left-hand side. You can see that there's those of you who are eagle-eyed will see that there's a joint missing. There's an open joint right there, and you can see that there's a stone still missing. So this is very much work in progress, but you can see that the rough racking is in progress on the right-hand side. And with the scaffolding away, you can begin to see this might contrast with that 1998 image of what you can see are brilliant white construction joints, which to anybody walking past this building will hopefully tell them that there is stewardship. There is considered remedial works in a phased manner being applied to this masonry structure. But also what you can see in front of the building are the columns still aligned in the way they fell, and all manner of other architectural detail that is highly identifiable, also sitting amongst the carnage. And another view of the wall heads having been repointed, and again, just to say, this is still work in progress. The pointing will continue to be applied at the ground level now that the scaffolding has been removed. And this is the same. So, with 1 minute to go, I'll perhaps take a little bit longer than 1 minute. I'd just like to talk a little bit about what might the options be. So, in terms of some of the philosophical considerations of how do we, and I say we, the owner of the building, the stakeholders of the House of Falkland estate, and the professionals that they engage, what are our options? What can we do going forwards? I'm going to sort of work in some terms here that I hope will provide the correct description. And certainly I would welcome comments during the questions. So, consolidation, preservative conservation, perhaps we can call it that. And that's pretty much what we've done, right? So we have conducted phase 1 of consolidation. This really chimes with, in the 20th century, early 20th century particularly, there was a romantic view of ruins in the countryside. In the countryside. So the Temple of Decision would look romantic in some people's eyes, this deconstructed masonry structure. And this is where we talk about the title of this building, this being a curated ruin. So curated being that we're physically engaged with it, we're working on it, but it still remains in this ruinous state, a long, long way from its originally designed form. So departing massively from the design intent. But okay, one of 3, consolidation, preservative conservation. Let's consider adaptive reuse, or shall we call it progressive conservation? So we've gone one step beyond the consolidation. And so what you can see in this image is a photoshopped image of the Temple of Decision with a beautifully designed and similarly, right, so with obvious similarities to the pitch and the design of the original roof, even down to the glass panels within the pitch. So paying its dues to the original construction, but providing a safe semi-internal space on a consolidated masonry structure. So at this point then, we've added materials, non-authentic materials. We've added a non-authentic roof structure to the building. But what it does is provides functionality to a certain degree. And I would just like to pay tribute to Jonathan Goatley Architects, whose image this is, to illustrate this adaptive reuse concept. And the third of the 3 options I suggest in terms of this philosophical exercise is restoration, and this wonderful term that I've recently come across, regressive conservation. So regressive in the terms of turning back time, regressive in terms of reversing decay phenomena and reversing the laws of gravity in this situation. So this is restoration, as we can all recognize that word. And what we're doing is we're returning the building back to the original design intent. We have enough evidence, I might argue, with the collateral damage that we have and the early recording of this 170-year-old building, we've got enough evidence to reconstruct not only the portico, not only the roof, but also the ancillary masonry aspects. Do you remember from the very first slide, we're talking about steps, and we're talking about gateposts, and we're talking about a wall. So we have ample evidence of just how Alexander Roos intended this building to be. And with that concludes my presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nick. That does pose a lot of questions. I hope we do have questions. We have few questions to begin with. All of you, please type in the questions, any suggestions you have, what you feel is the best approach as asked. So the first question is, what do you think is the longevity of the lime mortar that was applied, considering the weather conditions near the Temple of Decision? How long do you think the lime mortar work that was done would last?
That's a very good question. And in those very exposed areas, we should monitor the condition of the masonry constructor every 3 years, and perhaps even more often than that. If we have, as I made reference to within my presentation, big winter storms, then we should visit the Temple of Decision with a professional, critical eye every spring.
Thank you. The next question is more about project planning. If you're comfortable asking, it says, if for a typical project of this nature, how do you go about planning resources, procurement of materials, timelines, etc.? What is project planning?
That is an excellent question. Collaboratively, I think, would be the quick answer to this. So I did not come up with this scheme on my own. Of course, I showed you I confessed to wanting to get a helicopter involved, okay? And of course, collaboratively, this was disagreed with. There was not the money to do this. So suddenly we go down to a volunteer aspect. The project planning itself comes from experience, understanding what is capable, what time of year we should do the work, what is essential in terms of health and safety aspects of the work. And then there is the concept of expectation from the masons. So these are not my own stonemasons. I am collaborating with a masonry contractor. So Richard Fraser was highly adept at getting the best out of his men, or sometimes in less than favorable conditions. So project planning comes from experience, comes from understanding the difficulties. And then it was an utter pleasure for the planning to be intuitive and flexible. So I would be a frequent visitor of the project, and we would make changes in terms of, I remember to this day, talking with Richard, talking with the architect about how we cannot do any work to the inside, but we must leave this to another time for the sake of health and safety.
Thank you. The next question is, the best approach for such a building should have been restoration, because adaptive reuse can be done, but the essence of the actual building will be lost. So restoration, according to the person who's asked the question. So what are your thoughts about that? Given that the fact there were reference, was actual restoration ever an option?
Restoration is?
The options that you showed, you kind of reconstruct or kind of rebuild the whole structure as per the design that you had references for.
Yes, thank you. And another excellent question. I must unveil myself as a restorer. Okay, so my professional accreditation is accredited conservator restorer. And I'm not talking from ego. I don't want to be the one to stand the pillars, the columns back up. I don't want to be, it's no wish of mine to be applying my own ego to the reconstructing this building. This is an entirely scientific, philosophical aspect of returning this fine building back to its original designer's intent. The shadow lines that I illustrated just eloquently talk about what the original designer's intent was to be. The stones, the beautifully carved stones that are lying on the ground, right? They're not going to fall any further, but what they are doing on the ground is still casting the shadows that they're meant to cast, but not in the scheme that they're meant to be involved in. So this is not my decision to make. Obviously, there is a financial aspect to the restoration of this building, but there is another point that I wish to make, and that is climate change wants us to recognize the latent energy in any construction that we have previously built. And so there's a great deal of material. We know how difficult it was to engage these works on top of this hill. Imagine building that whole building on top of this hill, bringing all the material, the stone up. So I, on two fronts, support restoration, aligning to the original designer's intent, and also ensuring that the latent energy within the stonework, within the site, is used to its full potential once again.
Thank you. Next question is from Yulwal. She's asking, who would you say are the current stakeholders for this building apart from the owners?
Practically, professionals who have been engaged by the owners, the individual walkers who come across the building unexpectedly are all equal stakeholders. So I think you now are stakeholders in that you know a little bit about this building, and everyone might have their own views as to what would be the best thing going forwards. How are we going to leave this building to our successors? And it goes without saying that our successors are the main stakeholder in this discussion.
Thank you. The next question is slightly not a technical question, but why the name Temple of Decision? I believe that never came up. So people are curious why the name Temple of Decision.
I think that I don't know. I've never been privy to the archive, and I don't know where Temple of Decision was first written. But I do know that Margaret had her own views as to, it was a place where they would go to make a decision. So perhaps colloquially it became called the temple because of its neoclassical Greek revival beauty, was a place where they went to make decisions. But I think now, 170 years on, Temple of Decision still fits admirably. And yeah, I should reiterate from the last question that there is a considerable competent body of people who are the center of stewardship for the House of Falkland. They don't just look after the House of Falkland, the Temple of Decision, but the House of Falkland, and by association, all the other extended design landscape. So there is a wonderful organization that are responsible for the care and maintenance of all of these structures. And you can imagine that their priorities are sort of competing with each other. So not an easy job to have as a stakeholder.
Thank you. Our next question is, where can we find more references or photographs to read or study this building in more detail? Is there any publication that you could refer people to? Because I guess people are curious to read about the structure.
Yeah, there is, I don't know how public this document is, but there is an excellent thesis written by a student by the name of Robert Haas Zenz, a highly competent stone carver and conservator in his own right. What Robert does within his thesis is promote everything that I've spoken to you about and illustrate it with other images and other commentary. So I left my contact details. I would invite anybody to contact me. Yeah. In turn, I'll seek permission from my colleague, Robert. And
that's a good idea.
we can't make that more widely available.
Yeah, so they can contact you. People are curious to know more about the Indian connection with the building, because I think that kind of left them. If you could elaborate a little bit, if you know about the Indian connection, the Indian mother, so-called, little history about the Indian connection with the building.
Yeah, so Margaret Tyndall Bruce was the daughter of an Indian mother and a Scottish father. And I believe she was obviously born in India. That, I'm afraid, is as much fact as I know, and I won't delve into speculation.
Yeah.
But we also have this fantastic commentary that I played from Ninian Crichton Stewart, speaking about a recent 21st century visit by an Indian friend of his, who just found it compelling to take his shoes off at a certain point because he recognized the importance of place. Again, as a conservator, that's not really my topic of discussion. I'm more than happy to discuss
the conservation aspect, yeah. The next question is related to it. Were there any cracks in the building, and if yes, how were they treated?
There were cracks, and thank you. That's a lovely technical question. Getting straight back into the center of my target. The fine cracks that you saw my finger pointing to, we have a material, paraloid B72 in acetone, injected through a syringe with a hypodermic needle. So we go from masonry works, you could see the masons lifting and lowering stones, down to conservation works in terms of trying to keep rainwater out of the cracks for any to mitigate any future decay.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a question, my own question. Just wanted to know, when one does walk towards this site, is there an interpretive image or some sort of thing put out there to just tell them how this structure would have looked? Or is it just left like that? Because you do have reference images. Have they been put on display near the site?
Not as far as I know, no. I think that if you were to take a walk into this area, this extended managed landscape, it is with some surprise and some delight that you actually walk against the one of the longer elevations of the building. And then it's not until you walk around, take the path around the building, that you would see the front. Yeah. So it's almost an uninterpreted personal journey in itself.
So you don't think an interpretation would, in a way, be, I wouldn't say important, but would actually serve, would actually give the person who's there a more idea about the place, or maybe improve its significance, or put some more light on its significance or the architecture? Do you think that that's an option or something they should be looking at?
I think it's a very compelling argument that you make in terms of interpretation. However, I come from the school of less is more. The less signage, the less accoutrement, the more authentic the experience is. Even if it is a decayed Greek revival building, then you're sort of asked to work some of this stuff out on your own. However, I think that we should embrace technology, and I think that there could be a discrete sign with a QR code.
Yeah.
Somebody with a smartphone could simply click, and then a website giving interpretation would come up right there.
Yeah. Anything to just show, because you have so much of reference images, and you said there are references showing the way it was, and historical reference, so that would just help one to imagine. Or perhaps for me, I think I appreciate the place more if I know what it was, what it is now. I think it's just a personal thing. I feel that it might just trigger one's imagination, and perhaps standing there one would romanticize the site more, keeping those images in mind. That's what I thought. Okay, the next question is, what are the current plans for future conservation of the building? Any plans, or is it left like that, monitored?
I think that I can say that it's in discussion. I think that the stakeholders, the stewardship of the House of Falkland understand that there is a further commitment required. There is a certain there is certainly something else to do, whether it simply is monitor it as a consolidated ruin, or whether there is any form of ambition to try and reverse some of these decay processes. So I'm happy to say that it remains in discussion. Now, that first phase of consolidation works occurred in 2016 or 2017, I forget exactly when. So we're now 3 years on from that, at least. So there might be a place for some more sort of more formal thinking.
Yeah.
But as I say, in their defense, they have many sort of competing priorities.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the reason. This was a question asked somewhere else, but I think relevant now. When you keep things in ruins, the way it has been left, do you think it accelerates the weathering or the aging process of the structure vis-a-vis restored building, or the components are put in place? Just again a question out there. Are ruins stable enough without any sort of interventions, or are we just letting it deteriorate a little faster by leaving it the way it is? I understand the aspect of funds, but even with funds in certain sites, they do prefer leaving ruins as such. That's a decision. It's a question of the approach to it. So,
without a doubt, the deconstructed masonry structure at Temple of Decision will decay in an accelerated way as a result of it no longer has the practical rainwater management systems that it ever had, an overhanging roof, string courses in place, keeping the water out of the foot of the walls. Yes. So, and obviously, if we hadn't have conducted the rough racking process on the wall heads, water is continually percolating through that 2-ply masonry structure, the fine ashlar work and the coarse rubble work, dividing the two. So I can imagine that in the future, my brief history would say 1965 photograph, 1988 portico, 1998 decayed, 2016 effort, 2025 further decay, 2050 everything is on the ground, right? That might sound like a disaster movie, but that without any intervention whatsoever, I believe that's a sort of a timeline of decay.
Okay. I think we've run out of questions. Thank you so much, Nick, for your time. It's a pleasure, as usual, to listen to you, and we'll be listening to you again and again in future. As you promised, I'm going to hold you to that promise. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'll keep in touch. Thank you.